Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name's Tom Lyes, Director of Engagement at Lawyer Checker, and I'm joined today by Matt Berry, Head of Partnerships at Thirdfort. Afternoon, Matt. Thank you for joining us. I think this is your first time on one of our webinars, so feel free to explain a little bit about your role at Thirdfort, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. So yeah, as Tom said, I'm Matt. I look after partnerships at Thirdfort. I know many of you will be familiar with Thirdfort on our product, but for those of you that don't know who we are a digital ID, AML, and source of funds provider. I won't say too much about me and my role because I don't want to send everyone to sleep before we even get going. But I'm basically responsible for all of our relationships with our partners. One of our long-standing partners is, of course, Lawyer Checker. So our partnership means that any user of Lawyer Checker can access the Thirdfort product from within the Lawyer Checker platform. It's a really exciting time at Thirdfort at the moment. We've got new products, new pricing launching really soon, some of which we'll talk through today, and lots of other updates coming later in the year. So yeah, really excited to be here and looking forward to talking you all through it and answering questions. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Cool. Good to have you with us, Matt. Matt and I are going to talk through what the recent HMLR Safe Harbor announcement means for our existing Lawyer Checker Thirdfort clients. We'll explain how you'll have access to that within the next few weeks. For those of you who are not existing clients, we'll look to paint a really clear picture around digital ID and Safe Harbor to give you a flavour of why Thirdfort via Lawyer Checker might be a good fit for your firm by putting that into some context around the updated LSAG guidance released earlier this year and some of the SRA's findings from visits around AML. We're also going to talk through some other upcoming changes which should go live in early May, such as the addition of a gift or source of funds questionnaire, and as Matt mentioned, some changes to the pricing structure. So try and make that really clear. We have pushed, so for our existing clients, you might have seen some early correspondence talking around the 1st of May. We pushed the start date back a bit based on the fact that was sort of around the bank holiday. So we're now looking at the 10th of May for these changes to be live on Lawyer Checker. And hopefully that makes people's lives a bit easier. Couple of bits of housekeeping. During the webinar, we're more than happy to receive questions or on anything you might see or hear, as obviously we want this to be as engaging as possible. Please type these in on the right-hand side. You'll have your question box, and we'll either cover them as we go through, or we can come back to them at the end, depending on the context of them. A little bit of context to sort of start us off with, though, and Matt sort of alluded to this in his prelude. Lawyer Checker have been partnered with Thirdfort since 2019 as both the reseller and a shareholder. And speaking from personal experience over this time, it's been great to see the product so warmly received by Lawyer Checker clients and to see how it's really transformed people's onboarding and due diligence processes at a time when that's been really valued. Matt, let's delve sort of straight in. Digital ID is a hot topic right now and one that is seeing change at a great pace. If you haven't read the story that broke in the iNewspaper last week that I've shared on my LinkedIn, I'd encourage everyone to do so. It's a really interesting article around a very recent ID fraud. I'll put a link to the article in the chat comments as well. At a headline level, Matt, can you sort of summarize what the Safe Harbor scheme is designed to do and why Thirdfort have decided to prioritize the adoption of this?
Yeah, of course. So I think for quite a while now, and I think even before the coronavirus pandemic and the move towards remote working, there's been a real increase in the number of ID providers, the number of products available to conveyancers and to law firms. And at the same time, something we certainly saw was demand from the market for a bit more clarity and certainty on the best products to use to ensure that conveyancers are fulfilling their obligations when it comes to verifying client identity. And this was something that was recognised as well by the Land Registry. So they began looking at digital ID back in 2019. And then late last year, they released a consultation, which I'm sure many of you will have seen and perhaps even fed into. And in that consultation, they made it clear that they believed there was scope for a higher standard of ID check. So an ID check that uses best-in-class technology and as a result would give certainty and clarity to conveyancers that they've fulfilled all of their obligations. And in the same consultation, it was clear that Land Registry believed they could play a role in helping conveyancers and by extension, ID providers like Thirdfort to meet this higher standard. So last month, you will have all seen that they revealed the Land Registry digital ID standard. And the standard itself is underpinned by a set of requirements. And there are 4 requirements in total. I'm sure we'll come on to those later. So when we talk about the digital ID standard, what we mean is a set of requirements that when met, result in this enhanced level of ID check. Now, the other term you mentioned in your question, Tom, was safe harbour. And that's used kind of interchangeably with the digital ID standard. And what we mean by safe harbour is if you achieve safe harbour as a conveyancer, it simply means you're meeting the requirements under the digital ID standard. Now, the big benefit and the thing that sort of leapt off the page to us when we first discovered the ID standard and the plans for it was that if, as a conveyancer, you achieve safe harbour, you use a product that meets the ID standard, should the transaction turn out to be fraudulent, then Land Registry will not seek or pursue any recourse claim against the conveyancer in question. So, as you will no doubt know, under the Land Registry Act, they will compensate any losing party as a result of a fraudulent registration. And when money is paid out, they have the power to recoup some of that money and would attempt to do so from the conveyancer. So if you have the processes in place, you're able to evidence and demonstrate that you've achieved safe harbour and you're meeting the digital ID standard, you're protected from any recourse. And then just on your, sorry, I'm turning this as a long answer to a short question, but just on your point as to why we at Thirdfort are prioritising this, hopefully it's obvious based on the benefit that this kind of ID check brings to conveyancers. We've worked with conveyancers and law firms more widely since our inception to really build a product around their needs and around their feedback. We've been really lucky actually to work closely with Land Registry on the development of this product, and we wanted to make sure we'd be one of the first in the market to make sure we could provide an ID check that ticks all the boxes and allows conveyancers to achieve safe harbour. So we're really excited to be launching this and to be making it available to everybody in early May.
And I think one of the questions that we had in before the webinar, Matt, was from a couple of people that weren't conveyancers, that worked in other areas of law. It's important to paint a picture to people that this digital ID standard from the Land Registry is linked to other projects that are going on around ID. So the Department of Culture, Media and Sport are building a digital ID trust framework, of which I would expect there to be a great deal of similarity. Actually, the Land Registry are one of the first to sort of bring this to the market. And I think their initial focus has been very much around the likes of Thirdfort from a supplier perspective. And I think over the next few months, that will change as they focus their then more attention onto law firms. Matt, you talked about the standards that HMLR have sort of set with safe harbour. Can you just sort of run through those and how Thirdfort meets those standards? I know that we've had a question about some clients will not be able to use the Land Registry system, for example, not using the appropriate ID. Maybe you could just sort of touch on the passport driving licence situation in that answer.
Yeah, of course. That's fine. So there are 4 requirements that sit under the ID standard. The first 3 relate to obtaining a piece of evidence from the individual. The second is checking that piece of evidence is genuine. The third is matching that piece of evidence to the individual that's presenting it. And then the fourth is around proof of ownership, which applies in certain circumstances. So I'll go through each one one by one, and then I'll talk a little bit about how Thirdfort will meet them. So the first requirement, obtaining the evidence. So the key here is that the only piece of evidence that will be accepted or that Land Registry have said will be accepted and can be used to achieve safe harbour, is a piece of evidence that contains a biometric chip. So really what we're talking about here is passports. So if you have an in-date passport, if you look at the front cover, there'll be a little electronic chip logo on the front. All passports issued since 2006 will have this. And that just means that within your passport is this little tiny chip that contains all your personal information. So your name, date of birth, when the passport was issued, when it expires, as well as a copy of the photo. The key thing here is that documents that do not contain a chip, so driving license or an ID, national identity card, they can't be used to achieve safe harbour. It needs to be a passport with a biometric chip. The second requirement is to then check the evidence. So you must check that the evidence is genuine and that it hasn't been tampered with. So to achieve safe harbour, the Land Registry have said that to do so, you have to use something called NFC technology. So NFC technology is something that Tom will talk about a little bit more in a moment, and stands for near field communication. Oh, sorry, Tom, did I just drop off for a second?
No, I think I dropped off.
Okay, good. I was slightly panicking that I might have to do the rest of the webinar by myself. So glad to see that you've popped back on. So yeah, sorry, as I was saying, so for requirement 2, checking the evidence, you have to use something called NFC technology. It stands for near field communication. Tom will talk a little bit more about this in a moment. But all NFC technology allows you to do is to extract the data from the passport. So it reads that little chip I was talking about, takes the personal data and the photo, and ensures that it's genuine and hasn't been tampered with. So that's requirements 1 and 2. The third requirement is to then match the evidence to the individual, to the identity. So once you've extracted that information, extracted the photo, you need to compare that to the individual themselves. And to do so, you have to perform what's called a biometric or a liveness test. For anyone that's familiar with our existing Thirdfort product, you will have seen this in action before. This is where the individual has to take a selfie, a series of photos, or a short video. And what happens in the background is the technology compares those images or the video taken with the image that's been extracted from the passport. So it looks at things like the distance between the eyes, the length of the nose, those kind of things, to make sure it's the same person and it's not somebody just holding up a photo to the camera and trying to spoof the technology. So they're the first 3 requirements. The final one is around proof of ownership. So this is linking the individual to the property. And this only applies where the conveyancer is representing a transferor, so somebody selling, or a transfer of equity, a borrower, so remortgage, for example, or a lessor, so somebody leasing a property. And in these cases, to achieve safe harbour, the conveyancer must collect 2 pieces of proof of ownership evidence. And Land Registry have published an accepted list of evidence on their website in the guidance. It includes things like council tax bills, utility bills, insurance policy schedules, and they've been quite open that list may change over time as they receive feedback from conveyancers using products that are helping them achieve safe harbour. So they're the 4 requirements: obtaining the evidence, checking it, matching it to the individual, and then the proof of ownership piece. In terms of how Thirdfort will meet the requirements, it hopefully comes as no surprise that our new product will tick all 4 of those boxes. I won't steal Tom's thunder because he's going to do a little bit of a demo shortly. But in essence, an individual will be able to use their smartphone and the Thirdfort app to scan that little chip we're talking about in the passport. The data will be extracted. They'll then perform a liveness test. So they'll take a selfie and a video. We will compare that to the photo extracted from the passport. And then we'll also cover the proof of ownership requirements. So individuals will be able to select pieces of evidence from that defined list that Land Registry have published, and upload those to the Thirdfort app. All of that will be collected and then provided back to the conveyancer in the report, and the report will clearly state that the check has achieved safe harbour and has met the digital ID
cool.
standard.
I think that's really helpful to set out how sort of the standards work, Matt. Thanks for covering that. I wanted to touch on the sort of technology that is used to meet the biometrics bit, because many people won't necessarily know how this works. So in terms of how the technology achieves this, I was hoping we can try and break it down to make it easier to understand. because the LSAG money laundering guidelines make it really clear that you should make an effort to understand the technology and how that works if you're going to adopt it. The technology that achieves this, as Matt said, is called NFC, which stands for Near Field Communication. Ultimately, that's the ability for two electronic devices to communicate via a physical distance or a really close distance. And you'll be familiar with NFC technology because most of you will use it. It gives you the ability to pay for things on your phone, like Google Pay, Apple Pay, and Samsung Pay, as well as contactless. This will be achieved by a client holding their phone close to their passport. It's as simple as that. And as Matt said, all the UK passports issued from 2006 contain NFC chip, and that technology will extract the data on the chip that's embedded within the passport. The reason I thought I'd touch on this is I recently agreed my own house purchase as a first-time buyer, and I've actually used the technology that does the chip reading. And it is purely as simple as putting said phone on the front of said passport like that, and that will do the chip reading. What I did also want to show you is a short video now, which will show you how this will look in the Thirdfort app. So I'm just going to switch the slides over to a video that Matt has kindly shared with me, which I'm just going to play now. Oh, bear with me a second. Let me just play that. There we go. So here you'll see the video within the Thirdfort app. Those of you who are existing clients will be familiar with a lot of this process already. And I think a couple of the key differences that you'll see here is that the way the client records their own picture is slightly different and is slightly improved. Really in terms of the quickness of doing that. Is that fair, Matt?
Sorry, I was just on mute. Yes, it is. We're working with a new provider for that, and it should improve the time it takes to complete that part of the app.
And you'll see here that the technology used for the facial recognition bit does look slightly different. So in terms of the way this will take multiple images at once to effectively create a more streamlined version of the previous video that you would have seen. So that's really the key changes. I think Matt mentioned to me beforehand that within that as well, there will also be, when we go live, hopefully on the 10th of May, there will be a short video in that for the client that just shows them how to do the biometric bit between the phone and passport. So that's really the sort of key changes within the sort of standard ID check bit. I'm just going to switch back to the slides and jump onto the next bit. Matt, you've had some clients testing this recently. How has the testing gone so far?
Yeah, it's been good. So as with any product launch, we do a significant amount of testing, not only with the app, but also with the kind of the back end technology that supports all of it, to make sure we can iron out any bugs or any issues, but also make sure that app journey that you've just run through is as simple as it can be and is intuitive and will help make sure that as many people that go through it are able to complete it. So yeah, we've had some really good feedback from test clients. It's being incorporated as we speak. I guess the only other thing to add is that once this does go live, that's not the end of it. We'll continue to make changes based on feedback. You can actually communicate with the team. Consumers can communicate with the team through the app itself. We've got a great support team of around 15 based in Manchester that help individuals using the app to complete checks. All that feedback goes back to the product team, and we iterate things regularly. So yeah, it won't be sort of finished in early May, but in terms of initial feedback, it's all been good and all been really helpful.
That's good to hear. Okay, so I wanted to jump into the development of your gift or source of funds questionnaire next. So lots of our clients who are watching today will be users of Thirdfort, and especially those frontline conveyancing people I know really value the source of funds functionality. Do do you want to sort of talk to us a little bit, Matt, about some of the learning that Thirdfort have gathered around source of funds over the last 18 months? And what was the driver behind the creation of this new gift-or source of funds questionnaire?
Yeah, of course. So so I'm sure, as you say, many people will understand what our source of funds check is all about. But just very, very quickly for context, for anyone that hasn't used our source of funds feature, it's comprised of 3 parts. The first is a source of funds questionnaire. So that allows conveyancers to gather information on purchase funds to comply with the relevant regulations, and is done through the app. The second is the automatic bank linking. So for this, we use something called open banking. It's a government-backed technology that allows the individual to link their bank account to Thirdfort, and we can extract 6 months of bank statements and summarize the top 20 incoming and outgoing transactions. We're one of the few providers in the market that does that. We're FCA regulated, Financial Conduct Authority regulated, to allow us to do so. And then the third component is the ability to manually upload bank statements for anybody that's either not comfortable linking their bank to Thirdfort or doesn't have online banking. So that's what comprises a source of funds check with Thirdfort. And generally, the feedback we've had has been really good with this product. So we launched it, I think, sort of over 12 months ago. It's been a kind of add-on or a bolt-on to an ID check that conveyancers can do when they're initiating the ID check on the client. And the feedback we get is that it helps save time. It streamlines the process of gathering the information, either in person, which is now extremely difficult with COVID, or photocopying bits of bank statements or taking them, sending them by email. But I guess one of the biggest bits of feedback we got is that it would be really valuable to be able to do a source of funds check, not only on a purchaser, which is what the questionnaire we have at the moment is geared towards, but also to a gifter, so where there's a gift element involved. And the other piece of feedback we got was that on the automatic bank linking part I talked about, often that would fail, to be quite frank. It's fairly new, nascent technology, and in the early days, we were getting around 50% of cases where the bank linking just wouldn't work. So since then, we've been busy developing and iterating the product. I'm really pleased now to say that the bank linking has improved from 50 to over 90%. So that means the more and more consumers that are using the app and using the bank linking as part of the source of funds check are now able to connect that information. But I guess the bigger change is that we're also now offering what we call the gifter source of funds check. So the tweak there is the questionnaire that is filled out by the individual is now geared towards a gifter. So they answer questions relevant to them. The conveyancer can collect information where there's a gift involved, and do so through the app. So it's all automated, rather than, as I said, having to worry about collecting it in person or through paper or email or anything like that. So yeah, we're really excited to be launching this. It's a feature that is probably our most requested, I would say, over the last 12 months. So exciting to
shall we take a look at it, Matt?
Yes, let's do it.
So here you can see the client journey of the gift or source of funds questionnaire. So they start by obviously confirming how much money they're actually gifting and who are they gifting that money to in terms of their full name. And it can be obviously gifting that to multiple people if necessary. So you can see this one here is a gift to 2 purchasers. And then confirm that. And then a really key part of the source of funds journey with Thirdfort is in relation to these intuitive questions. So where's the gift money coming from? Is it from savings? Is it from property refinance? Is it selling a property? Is it selling an asset? Is it inheritance? Is it a divorce settlement, or is it somewhere else? These will all have appropriate questions attached to them, which we'll show a few examples of in a moment or two. I noticed that one person has asked a question about, will you be looking at the adding source of wealth checks? I think the the key message here is that the feedback we get from conveyancers who use Thirdfort and who use the source of funds functionality is that ultimately source of wealth is very much down to the conveyancer to satisfy their own requirements on that. But ultimately, using open banking and using the source of funds questionnaire, and in this instance, using the gift-or questionnaire, should help a conveyancer ask the right questions around source of wealth, and it should bring up the right sort of conversations that the conveyancer is having, basically. So if we have a look at the first one here, they can confirm how much they've got saved, and then they can provide some very specific details about that, which obviously the fee earner can match up to either what's on the bank statements or what comes through via the open banking data. So these intuitive questions are across the board for each of those options that you've looked at. And I think as Matt said, one of the key bits of feedback that we've had previously is that maybe the gift-or journey wasn't quite as smooth as it could be. And I think this is a real improvement within that area. So hopefully that's been useful to sort of touch on the gift-or source of funds questionnaire. And that's really relevant to our existing clients. And so hopefully all of our existing users have found that helpful. Matt, you obviously mentioned earlier on some pricing changes. I've decided to sort of summarize those on the screen for you to talk through, if that's all right. I noticed one of the questions was around like a start date. So I think, Claire, you asked, when does the new HMLR system go live? Well, the HMLR Safe Harbor doesn't itself have its own start date, but as soon as you start adhering to the requirements, it will be live. So hopefully that date is the 10th of May. And just a really important point for me to our existing Lawyer Checker clients, what you can expect from us in the next few days is a brand new client guide and a brand new law firm guide. So you've got all the updated and appropriate collateral, and that will be sent to all users by our head of customer success, Sophie. So please keep an eye out for that. But Matt, if you could sort of talk us through the pricing changes and some of the common questions that we might see here, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, of course. And please, if I know sometimes pricing changes and things can be complicated. So if anyone does have any questions on this in particular, just fire them into the chat and I'll try and work them in seamlessly. So the first, I guess, big change here is that we're separating our ID products from our source of funds product. So those of you that use Thirdfort today, we have one product priced at $9.95. That's effectively the original ID check. You can see on the screen there, the middle of the three options, and you can initiate a source of funds check as part of that, or basically for free. But with this change, we're unbundling the two and charging for them separately. So on the left-hand side, you've got our ID and AML products. We have our light ID, original ID, and the standard ID check. The light ID we've not actually talked about too much so far. That's effectively our light version of an ID check. It doesn't actually require the consumer, so the individual, to download the Thirdfort app. If you have the name, you have the date of birth, you have the address, you can initiate a light ID check on an individual. We see conveyancers using that in sort of low risk transactions. So potentially where it's a repeat client, or the client doesn't have the mobile, doesn't have a smartphone, sorry. The second one is the original ID. As I just mentioned, this is the product we have out there at the moment. So this allows an individual to scan a document, passport, driving license, ID card, do a liveness test where they take a video and a selfie, and satisfy the regulations that way. And that's staying at $9.95 per completed check. And then the new check we have is the standard ID, the one we've been talking through and the journey that Tom demoed. And that's the one that will meet the Land Registry digital ID standard and help conveyancers to achieve safe harbor. Just a couple of points on the pricing. It will still stay as pay as you go. So there's no need to pre-purchase credits or anything like that. It's still per completed check. So for whatever reason, somebody You initiate a check on an individual, they don't complete the app journey, there'll be no charge. And the final point to make is that if you initiate a standard ID check and the individual doesn't have a passport or has difficulty scanning it, what will happen is it will default down to an original ID check. So you'll still get a result. They'll still be able to upload their driving license, for example, but it won't meet the digital ID standard, and it won't mean that you're achieving safe harbor. But you'll be charged for that product. You'll be charged £9.95, not £14.95. Then on the source of funds side, as we talked about, we've now got two flavors of this product: the purchaser source of funds and the gifter source of funds. The difference being the questionnaire element. So there's the questionnaire, the automatic bank linking, and the ability to manually upload statements. With the purchaser source of funds, the questionnaire is tailored to the purchaser. Gifter, it's tailored towards the gifter. The key distinction here is the pricing is per property transaction, not per individual. So if there's two purchases, for example, the total price would be £9.95. If there was 4 gifters, the total price would be £9.95. It's not per individual, it's per property transaction. Hopefully that's not too complicated. But yeah, otherwise, hopefully that makes sense, and happy to answer anything else, Tom. I don't know if you have any other questions that you've received, but hopefully that's clear.
I think so. I think that's really good to clear that, Matt. And I know a few people have asked for the matrix, and more than happy to send that across. That's not a problem. We have got a number of questions that I just wanted to cover that have come in, some really good ones. So we'll just work our way through these. In the meantime, I'm just going to release a couple of polls. One for our existing Lawyer Checker users. So if you would like a call from our client success team to help you with the changes, just have to click on there and I'll arrange that for you. That's not a problem. And then for our non-Lawyer Checker Thirdfort users, if you'd like to arrange a demo, you can just click on the poll that I just released there, and we'll contact you to set that up. But in terms of some of the other questions that have come through, so I know we've had a couple from sort of non-conveyancers, so from will writers, around compliance for them. Ultimately, this still applies, despite the fact that they might not be linked to the land registry and safe harbour. Using best-in-class technology to verify ID, no matter what area you work in, is still highly important. And as a sort of sector that maybe hasn't seen the knock-on impacts of this yet, you would be getting ahead of the curve by that. So I talked about that DCMS digital ID standard. These are all similar things that will be built into that, that come in across different sectors. So yeah, I think it's still appropriate for you, even if you're not a conveyancer and you're a will writer, because you're using best-in-class technology. And that's hopefully similar to another client who's asked a question around, would these be compliant for things like CQS, HMRC, etc. I think from an ID perspective, you need to look closely at the LSAG money laundering guidelines to obviously make sure you meet your requirements. But the key elements of what Thirdfort is doing here is meeting the LSAG guidelines. So Daniel, in answer to your question, you'd certainly be compliant in that area. Belinda has asked a question about, not all countries have biometric passport. So what happens when a client does not have a biometric passport? Matt, is that a case of it just reverting to the original ID check?
Yeah, that's right. So our standard ID check will work on any passport that has a biometric chip. So it doesn't matter if it's UK or otherwise. But yeah, if they don't have a passport, or they don't have a passport with a chip, then they have to use the original ID check. They use a driving license or something similar. So this is what Land Registry have said with the digital ID standard. They only believe that using a passport with a chip is good enough to meet that enhanced level of ID check. So yeah, they would have to complete it with another document, and you wouldn't be able to achieve safe harbour when not using a passport.
Someone's asked a question about, presumably clients will need to agree to use the app. Jacqueline, yeah, that's correct. When a client downloads the app, they complete a end user license agreement, which is a fancy way for saying terms and conditions. So they'll do that bit at the point in which they download the app. At this stage, is it right that you would only use the new standard ID check for conveyancing matters and the original ID check for other areas of law? I think that's probably a fairly fair comment. And that's the way that you'd ultimately use that. So hopefully that clears that up for you, Lorna. Stephen, please can I clarify the pricing? If we do an ID check for a source of funds for a purchase, does this mean it will be £9.95 on top of the ID checks? What happens pricing wise if clients reject open banking on source of funds? So in answer to that question, yes, the source of funds cost is on top of the ID check. If the client rejects open banking, though, they're obviously automatically prompted to upload statements in a different way. So not all clients can use open banking. So they can upload their statements manually via taking a picture of them or uploading documents. So there are multiple options for clients around proving source of funds. Joe, yeah.
Can I dive? Sorry, just a very quick point on that is if there is no result, so if you initiate a source of funds check, they reject the bank linking, they don't want to do the questionnaire, they don't want to do anything, there'll be no charge. So the kind of completed check element still applies on the source of funds side as well. You'll never get charged for a check where you don't get a report back with helpful information. So
my good friend Joe from Sheffield says, how will the source of funds work when there is more than one party? Do both parties need the app and receive the link, or can one party upload both source of funds evidence?
So I guess there's two questions in one there. One around like, do both people need the app and then uploading the evidence. So you don't actually need to have a smartphone to use Thirdfort. The app can be downloaded on any phone. When the check is initiated, the conveyancer needs to ensure they just use the relevant mobile number. So you can actually initiate multiple checks to the same mobile number. They just appear as separate ID and source of funds checks in the app. So the answer to the question is, do both parties need the app? Not necessarily. But if there are two individuals involved, then it would make sense to get evidence from both of them, and they can do that on the same phone, or they can do it on two separate ones as well. The key point there is if there's two purchasers, the price is the same, so you won't be charged twice. You're charged £9.95 for whether there's one purchaser or two. Similarly, on the gifter side, if there's one gifter or five, it's the same price.
And then last question before we let people go enjoy some sunshine. Do your checks carry out continuous monitoring?
So it's a great question, and no, not right now. So monitoring isn't something we offer, but it is something on our roadmap. So I kind of teased at the start that we have a roadmap full of exciting things coming this year. Monitoring is actually the next thing that's coming up, and pleased to say that the team at Lawyer Checker will be adding that to their platform. So that's just a big coming soon. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled.
The question we often get around things that are coming soon, hopefully later this year, is company checks as well, Matt, which I know a few people who are watching today have inquired about. So thanks everyone for submitting those questions, and hopefully we've covered the majority of them. If for whatever reason you don't think I've covered your question, and I may have missed the odd one because there is a lot in there, my contact details are up on the screen. So please feel free to drop me an email or give me a call later this afternoon, and I'll be more than happy to help. I just want to thank, first of all, Matt for joining us and being so helpful in terms of breaking down some of the changes, especially to our existing clients who we're sort of 3 weeks or so away from launching this with them. So Matt, thanks for joining. Really appreciate your time, and obviously thanks for everyone who joined as well in terms of taking part in the session. Hopefully that's been helpful, hopefully that's been interesting. Any questions, by all means feel free to send them over to me. and I'll be happy to answer them. But go and enjoy the sunshine on your lunch. It's a nice day. Everyone, bye bye.
Great, thanks, Tom.